chill in the air. Winter was not kind to Daisy. The cold air made it hard for her to start in the morning. And with no firebox to keep her warm, she rattled as she journeyed along the branch line. As Percy was away being mended, she sometimes had to take his trucks. She did her best not to grumble, but she couldn't help complaining one morning.
"Oh, I'm not suited for this," she shivered at the station. "How can I give the passengers a luxurious ride if I'm near freezing all the time?"
"Now that's enough," scolded her driver. "People rely on us to keep going, no matter the season. Some things can't be changed. The weather is one of them." "Aye," agreed her second man. "Besides, the only time the passengers don't enjoy their ride is when they hear you moaning about the cold." Daisy harrumphed. She knew her crew were right, but she didn't want to admit it just yet. Late one evening, Daisy was returning to Ffarquhar after her last passenger service. The wind howled, and the snow buffeted her from every direction.
"Bother winter," she muttered. "Bother the cold."
As she neared the Elsbridge Viaduct, Daisy could see a faint light. "That's odd," she thought. "Thomas and Toby should be back in the shed by now." Nearer and nearer she drew to the mysterious light. As she crept across the viaduct, she could make out a pale figure, dressed in a railwayman's outfit, staggering beside her with lamp in hand. Daisy gasped as they passed by him. "Stop! Stop!" she cried to her driver. "That poor man will freeze in this winter!" "Who are you talking about?" quizzed the driver. "There was a man on the viaduct," she said. "We can't just leave him out there." The driver braked and reversed back to the bridge. There was no sign of a man anywhere. Daisy was very confused. "Look!" shouted the second man. Squinting towards the ground, Daisy could make out footprints that followed the length of the bridge. "Good heavens!" she cried. The footsteps veered off the bridge. "Hello?" she called into the night. "Is anyone out there?" But it was no good. Any hopes for a reply were swallowed by the howling wind. "Come on, Daisy," urged her driver. "We need to find help as soon as we can." Determined, Daisy sped off down the line. As she traveled, the snow began to lessen. She heard a familiar chugging up ahead and honked her horn as she approached Terrence's field. "Hello, Daisy. Isn't it a lovely—" "Someone's fallen from the viaduct!" Daisy shrieked as she flew past. "Call an ambulance!" "You count on it!" he called, and chugged back to his owner's house to phone for help. Toby was being cleaned after the day's work. "Oh, it's nights like this I'm thankful for a nice warm shed," he said. Thomas, fast asleep, replied with a loud snore. Suddenly, a great commotion was heard, and Daisy rushed into the yard. "For goodness sake," grumbled Thomas, stirring. "I was having such a nice rest, too. Can't you diesels ever just go about your business quietly?" "Never mind your rest," retorted Daisy. "Someone's fallen off the viaduct. We must help." Thomas felt guilty for his outburst. But I can't," he said. "My crew has gone home for the evening." "It's all right," said Toby. "I've still got steam, Daisy. Let's hurry back and see what we can do." The two engines raced back as quickly as they could. Terrence was as good as his word. The authorities were at the bridge, searching for signs of the man. The engine crews bundled up and aided in the search. "Oh, I do hope that poor man is all right," worried Daisy.
"As do I," replied Toby. "But whatever made him go walking out in weather like this?"
Hours passed, and the search was soon called off. "They've combed the water and the river banks," explained Toby's driver, "but there's no sign of a man anywhere." Daisy was very distressed.
But I saw him! And the footprints, too!"
Now, soothed Toby. "No one is discounting what you saw, but perhaps he didn't fall into the river."
"If he didn't," asked Daisy, "then where could he have gone?"
Toby conceded that the situation was indeed odd.
"Well, unless he started walking on the tracks after you passed, I really don't know."
The engine said no more as they went back to the shed. Daisy was lost in thought as she went about her work next day. No matter how much she thought about the situation, it just didn't make sense. She arrived at Ffarquhar and found Thomas waiting in the loop. "Such a shame," mused Thomas to no one in particular, "when a good engine starts going mad, seeing things that aren't there, crying wolf due to their own imagination. Oh, what a pity." Annie and Clarabelle, who still weren't keen on Daisy, tittered cheekily. Daisy scowled.
"I do hope there's a way to save the poor thing," Thomas went on. "It'd be too bad if a modern machine had to be cast aside due to madness."
"That's quite enough out of you," came a stern reply. Toby had been resting in the nearby shed and heard everything.
"You've a lot to say for someone who couldn't muster the strength to come out of the shed last night. Your train is due now. Off you go."
Thomas huffed as he moved out of the siding.
"Pay no mind, Daisy," advised the tram engine. "He's just upset he's not the only passenger service on the branch anymore. Something will come to light about the man you saw. I know it will."
Daisy said nothing. She didn't feel confident in Toby's assertion. That evening, heavy snow fell again. Thomas had to bring empty trucks back to Ffarquhar, but was delayed by the weather. His crew finally decided to brave it and set off into the night. Thomas grumbled and shivered as he traveled down the line. As he crossed the viaduct, he looked all around. The river below was frozen solid. "Silly Daisy," he muttered. Suddenly, there was a sharp bump. "Whoa!" cried Thomas in horror as his wheels left the rails. His driver slammed the brakes. Thomas bounced along the sleepers before coming to a stop. "Phew," he sighed. "What on earth was that?" He heard the crunch of snow. Beside him was a man dressed like a guard and holding a lantern. He had a mischievous smirk on his face. "Nothing funny about an accident," huffed Thomas. The man said nothing. "Well," continued Thomas, "aren't you going to get help? We can't stay here all night." The smile fell to a scowl. The man turned and slowly ambled up the line, accompanied by the rhythmic creaking of his lantern's handle. "Strange," said Thomas to himself. "Who are you talking to?" asked his driver, who had been inspecting the rails. "There was a guard standing beside me," said Thomas. "I sent him to get help, but he didn't seem quite right to me." The driver rubbed his chin. "I didn't see anyone there," he said. "And it couldn't have been our guard. I just sent him back up the line for help." Thomas fell silent. and thought about Daisy's ordeal. The breakdown crane soon arrived to put Thomas back on the rails. He made his way back to Ffarquhar, where Daisy and Toby were waiting. Thomas explained everything.
"It's such a shame, Toby," Daisy teased, "when perfectly good engines become victims of their own imagination."
Toby chuckled as Thomas went red in the face.
"In all seriousness," continued Daisy, "we've seen this man twice now. What could be happening here?"
Thomas and Toby had no answers, and soon the engines fell asleep. The next day, Daisy was halted at the signal near Terrence's field, telling the tractor about the recent events. Terrence's face went pale.
"Daisy," he asked, "do you believe in ghosts?"
Daisy's eyes narrowed.
"I won't rule anything out, but are you suggesting—"
She trailed off.
"I am," said Terrence flatly. "The engines who ran this line before Thomas told me of an old legend. I never believed it, up until this point."
"What happened?" quizzed Daisy.
Terrence took a deep breath and began.
"It was during a winter not unlike what we're seeing now. An engine was coming home through the driving snow, but stopped before the viaduct due to a faulty signal. The guard took a lamp and ventured up the line to check with the signalman. The engine grew more and more impatient. They suddenly saw the signal turn green. The crew wanted to wait for the guard to return, but the engine convinced them they would find him up the line. As they crossed the viaduct, the engine's lamp caught the guard walking up the line towards them. The engine whistled loudly, and the guard had to jump clear, right into the frozen river."
Terrence went silent for a moment.
"They searched and searched, but they couldn't find the remains of the guard. They say his ghost still roams the line, playing tricks as payback for the engine that took his life."
Daisy was speechless.
"It's only a theory," continued Terrence, "but perhaps he's been playing tricks on you and Thomas. In his eyes, one engine must be as good as another."
"Well," huffed Daisy, "we'll just have to put a stop to that, won't we?"
She rolled away without a plan, but filled with determination. Night fell once again. Daisy finished her last passenger service, then came back to Ffarquhar. It was clear as she left the big station. But the further along the branch line she ventured, the more it began to snow.
"No doubt who's behind this," she muttered. "How silly it all is," she thought, "scheming of ways to stop some ghost. Perhaps Thomas was right. Maybe Oh!" Daisy shuddered violently and came to a complete stop in the middle of the viaduct. "What's happened?" she cried.
"Sounds like you've blown a fuse to me," said the driver. "You're not moving on your own, I'm afraid."
He and the second man bundled up, then set off back to the station for help. Daisy wasn't particularly pleased with being left alone. The snow became heavier, piling up around her wheels. Daisy shuddered from the cold. Then, up ahead, she noticed a light swinging through the darkness. "Oh no," she groaned. Sure enough, the figure of a man appeared before her. A smirk curled up on his face as he looked at her. Daisy gathered her courage.
"I suppose this is all you're doing then, isn't it?"
The figure nodded his head.
"Yes, I've heard all about you. You really think this is going to give you solace?"
The figure's grin melted to an expressionless stare.
"I'm sorry for what happened to you," she went on, "but some things can't be changed. The past is one of them. You'll never find peace if you linger around here. Is this really the legend you want to leave for yourself? A nasty man playing tricks on trains?"
The figure snickered, the grin returning to his face.
"I, for one, am not pleased with what you're doing. You've no place on our branch line. I want you gone. Do you hear me?"
Suddenly, the rails began to shake. The figure stepped back, his lamp glowing the brightest it ever had.
"Oh dear,"
shivered Daisy. The rails rattled and hummed, and the figure smirked at the diesel.
"Oh, please, make it stop!"
shouted Daisy. A shrill whistle sounded out through the night. "Oh!" she cried, and shut her eyes tight, waiting for the worst. A terrible screeching sounded out. She didn't dare open her eyes. "It's only me." Daisy opened her eyes. Thomas stood before her, puzzled. She looked all around. The figure was nowhere to be found. When Daisy's driver and second man returned, Thomas coupled up to her and brought her back to the sheds. The diesel rail car was silent as they moved down the line. "You saw him, didn't you?" Daisy stirred from her trance.
Come again, dear?"
"The guard with the lamp. You saw him just now, didn't you?" Thomas asked again. Daisy hesitated.
"I did," she said simply.
"Well," Thomas replied, "it sounds like you gave him a good talking to. I could hear you from down the line." Thomas paused impressively. "I still find it hard to believe in such nonsense as ghosts, but I'm sorry I was so rude to you." Daisy smiled.
"That's all right, dear. After all," she winked, "it's only natural that the premier passenger services on the island tease each other from time to time."
Thomas chuckled and cracked a smile. As the snow fell, it no longer carried the weight of a lost, misguided spirit. Rather, it fell calm and soft, like a sigh of relief. Daisy knew the guard had finally gone to a better place, as had she, as her and Thomas pulled into the warmth of Ffarquhar sheds.